But we can go ahead and get started. So yeah, obviously today we're going to be talking about the December 15th CPUC decision on net energy metering 3.0. And so we have two wonderful speakers to enlighten us about what's going on with that fight and how we can kind of make sure that we know what's going on and get involved. So first we'll be hearing from Maria Stamas, an energy justice attorney and founding co-director of the People's Utility Commons, a nationwide organizing project for utility justice. And then we'll hear from Jessica Tovar, the energy democracy organizer at the local Clean Energy Alliance and coordinator of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. So I think first we'll hear from you, Maria, and if there's anything logistical you need me to do, please let me know. Otherwise, take it away.
Sounds great. And good morning / afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see a few of you who I'm familiar with, and nice to meet many of you as well. So yeah, I've been, what I want to talk about today is really applying a justice lens to the whole debate around California net energy metering. And I'll just start with a disclaimer, which I probably don't need to say here, but I am not an economist and I'm not an engineer, but I am an energy justice attorney. And I also sit on California's low-income oversight board over the investor-owned utilities in California around issues related to energy poverty and energy justice. And I've been in that role for many years and seen kind of what the CPUC has and hasn't done at that realm. And I've also been, since the NEM debate first broke out, really just wondering, like, why is this debate in particular so thorny? Like, it almost feels like, I was thinking about an analogy, it feels like a tornado where like people are ending up on all sides of the debate kind of in unexpected ways, and other folks are missing from the debate who feel really important to it. And it just feels really messy. And so why is that? And my take is that the NEM debate is exposing a lot of flawed assumptions that are baked in our utility system. And they're assumptions and values that have kind of been accepted for many years for some, but are increasingly outdated and just not congruent with a just and livable planet. And there's also some deliberate obfuscation and what I'm calling red herrings that have been added to the mix. And what do I mean by that? I think the debate feels slippery because the whole debate was framed around this idea of a cost shift that came from the utilities. And the reason I think it's slippery and a bit of a red herring is that even if you accept that there's some modicum of a cost shift, the solution being proposed is a bit absurd to me. So essentially what we're hearing is like, it's not fair in terms of how solar benefits have been distributed, which is real, like solar has not been distributed equitably. But the solution is just to end the program. Instead of saying like, let's actually embed justice into our solar policies, the solution is let's take away the incentives, which to me suggests something is not right. Looking at it a little bit deeper, how many of you have heard about the book Revolutionary Power by Shalonda Baker? Seeing a few nods. Cool. Yeah, so she has a whole chapter on this, and she traces this cost shift argument to the utility industry starting in Arizona, and then it got picked up by ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. And it's both a debate frame that they've used in kind of like a divide and conquer way, but there's also like a specific playbook around, I'll actually show you here. This I pulled from her book, but basically it's like, first frame the debate as one of fairness and around a cost shift. Second, start doing this economic modeling about questioning, what's the exchange rate and increase fixed charges, and think about avoided costs that are very specific to solar in particular, which is not normal. Like I haven't seen an avoided cost value specifically for other technologies like gas. We're not talking about changing the economics of other fossil fuel things that we want less of. It's just solar that's getting singled out here. And taking that one step further, And what I mean by like these embedded assumptions that are coming to the fore is that across the utility system and its governance, there's like tons of modeling and economic optimization exercises. And to the point where efficiency and economic optimization are valued over justice and equality, our health, a livable planet. And when we think about avoided costs in particular too, there is a reality that it's baked into federal law, but that can also, there's ways to work around that. As a lawyer, I've seen many legal memos where we don't have to be beholden to federal law, but also, as organizers, we can work to change that. And I think we should. That's just a side note. And then the last piece here around thinking about the economics is there seems to be a focus among regulators to say, well, solar's cheaper now, so we should just like end all incentives for it. And there's some really interesting work by this guy, Brett Christophers, called Fossilized Capital, that's talking about solar is not actually profitable as oil or gas is. And so it's still losing out, even if we were to leave it to the market. And I'm not saying we should leave it to the market, but just kind of calling into question some of these arguments that are out there. Speaking of which, that has bothered me a bit about the NEM discourse to date is that thinking about the climate, like California is not on track to meet our climate goals. I looked up kind of the latest from the government reports or agency reports on this, and they actually say that we need to increase our rate of investment by 3 times the amount that we're at today in wind and solar. And NEM is going the opposite direction. And another thing I question is like, if that's the case, and why are we not pressuring, why is the government not investing and doubling down on investments, not just in solar, but in energy efficiency, storage, et cetera, not seeing that happen. And then another thought I've been thinking a lot about is that this debate really talks a lot about affordability, which is real. Like we're seeing our utility bills go up and up with no recourse. Disconnections, while they've been suspended for a bit, are, the debt has accrued. They're set to restart any month now. There's a real affordability crisis. But it's kind of strange to me that that affordability crisis is being addressed in a solar proceeding. I think an affordability crisis should be addressed across the board in our laws and in our rates. And when we think about justice, it's not just affordability and ending disconnections, but it's about high road access to jobs, it's about ownership, and the NEM decision is working against so many of these pieces. When we also think about justice, I think about reparations. I think about how the fossil fuel industry to date has caused harm for everyone, but most of all for lower income communities of color. And if we had a fund that approximated those damages and then put those forward towards clean energy and resilience and environmental justice communities, that would be a step toward justice. But I'm not hearing any of these proposals on the table. And I think just 2 more slides here. It's my belief that the grid is a public good. And I think sometimes that's conflated when we think, oh, we have regulators, and even though it's in investor-owned utility hands, that it's still a public good. But it's not right now. It's still owned by private monopoly utility companies. And the way that the NEM decision is looking like it could shake out, it's actually creating an incentive for the rich not to give back solar energy to the grid, instead to kind of hoard it or keep it to themselves, and not incentivize more democratic ownership across the board. So I brainstormed just a few things of, if we really care about justice in our solar industry and energy justice across the board, and if we really took some of these arguments that are wound up in the NEM debate seriously, you could look at addressing bill affordability in a real way. We could end utility shutoffs. We could create a progressive bill structure and not a regressive one. We could increase the care subsidy that is available, but only to 30% of the bill to 100% of the bill. Looking at renewables, we could actually fund major investments in rooftop solar and community solar We could look at labor standards to increase high road jobs in distributed solar and storage. And then we could also look at reparative policies. And with that, I'll just close and say that I know this has been a complicated debate in some ways, and it's still unclear exactly where it'll land, but my hope is that at minimum, it helps us all clarify what we truly need for a just utility system. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate that whole presentation. And like I said before, not only did it speak to me, but I really feel like you speak for me and for communities like mine. And so I want to appreciate that. And I want to share with everyone, first off, in an ideal situation, I would have visuals as well. That's how I like to present things. But I don't today. So I'll invite you to visualize with me right now. And the way I do that is I close my eyes. So it's important for me to kind of take a few steps back and talk about, where I came from, like what my community looked like growing up as a child. And in my community there, I lived in housing projects, first of all, and the projects that we lived in were probably the most clean, sane housing situation my family had ever been in. Because prior to living there, we lived in slums. And the place that we lived in was by a huge boulevard in East LA called Olympic Boulevard. That street actually was a huge wide street, and across from us, literally across the street, were hundreds of factories. And in these factories, there were sweatshops where clothing was assembled. There were also crematoriums that burned not only human bodies, but animal bodies as well. And one of the largest facilities that I was aware of was the Farmer John's slaughterhouse. This is in the city of Vernon, which actually is where bacon and ham comes from. So it was very common for me as a child in inner city Los Angeles to see huge diesel trucks carrying hogs to the slaughterhouse. Now, imagine that with about 5 gas-fired power plants, huge transformers, and huge power lines. When I was a child, a friend used to visit me from outside of the community, and she always said to me, "Jessica, why does it smell so bad here?" And I didn't have an answer to that question. And it wasn't until I grew up and was a young adult did I understand exactly what was happening in my community. It wasn't uncommon to see a lot of these power lines spark and catch fire. It wasn't uncommon for people to be sick all the time. It wasn't uncommon for me to go to school with like different struggles like allergies and headaches. And looking back on it, I was expected to be able to focus. And I have some very deep issues with actually focusing and having to shut out noise. And I do correlate that with the toxic soup that I grew up in. So going back to the smells and the sickness in my community, and learning as a young adult that all these operations, some people in my community worked in, many did not, but so many corporations were benefiting off of polluting this very community. And as I continued to learn more about environmental injustice and specifically environmental racism, I really understood that very few people on this earth benefit from that. And so many communities live this way throughout, not just in the United States, but the rest of the world. So that is how I wanted to show you where I live. And in the same context, my mother struggled to pay the bills. So I do know what it's like to go without electricity. I do know what it's like to have to take a cold bath. And I do know what it's like to live in a home that's freezing cold. And our only source of heat was to turn on an oven. So I invite you to open your eyes and take a deep breath. So that experience in my life is what brought me here today. It's been a long road. What I want to see is communities like this, like mine, to actually be invested in the very solutions that we need in our communities. We don't benefit from the wealth of clean energy that exists, in the desert, in the form of farms, solar and wind farms. As a matter of fact, earlier today at a press conference, we had somebody who grew up in the Central Valley talk about they're struggling to just get their own community members to get those jobs within those solar farms that are all around them in the Central Valley, and taking up ag land, right? So we don't benefit from the financial wealth. We certainly pay with our own health. And we're definitely at a point where we describe as a crossroads, right? We know that fossil fuel energy is hurting people. We know that we need to shut down nuclear plants. We are seeing the opposite happening right now. How do we build a clean energy system that benefits people who have had to suffer at the hands of dirty energy, right? Dirty energy operations. These are the costs that are never factored into those profits that these corporations make. So I really fear that decision from the CPUC, because we all know that they have gate kept for the utilities. The mere fact that this decision is happening in between major holidays is no coincidence. Right after the election, which Gavin Newsom was on the ballot, this to me is a setup. And it's been a setup for a long time. The writing is on the wall that more people want to build energy resilience and microgrids in their community. And the very utilities and their supporters are pulling the rug from underneath us and have made this such a political situation that you can't see the difference unless you're in the weeds of the situation. And I am tired of communities like mine losing and paying with their health and being in perpetual debt, having their power shut off, and having no say, and having a system that by design is designed for us not to understand and not to weigh in on. And for that reason, that's why I'm here today in the space of advocating for a clean energy system so that we can undo that harm that people like me and communities like mine have experienced for way too long. This is like, again, the crossroads. Do we continue on that path of destruction and sacrifice communities along the way? Or are we going to undo those harms and do it the right way, starting with the very communities that have been dumped on for too long? So, my hope is that December 15th looks different, different from what I fear. I don't know. All I know is that we need your help. And the mere fact that you're in this space means you're trying, right? And I just want to appreciate that. That is all. Clean power to the people.
Wow, thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing all of that, and Maria for your insights. Yeah, I want to thank everybody for coming. I know Al wanted to be here but wasn't able to, and yeah, this is our last call of the year, so we will see you all in the new year. Thanks for being here.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.